We all know what a Viking ship looks like, more or less. However, before the Viking Age, we do have examples of ships which, although a bit different, were built with mostly the same technique. So, in today's video, we're talking about the oldest known Nordic rowing vessel, the Nydam boat. So this magnificent boat, the Nydam boat, is a central part of the exhibition at Castle Gottorf in the northernmost German state, Schleswig-Holstein, in the town of Schleswig in the Viking Age, known as Hedeby or Haitabo. It was recovered from a bog in southern Denmark, very close to the German border, and it's a very interesting place because this place of offering was originally a small lake during the Iron Age, but this lake gradually filled up with organic matter until it eventually became a bog. The first excavations at Nydam took place in 1859 under the direction of teacher and archaeologist Konrad Engelhardt, and they continued until the outbreak of the Second Schleswig War between Denmark and Germany in early 1864. He found weapons, tools, pieces of clothing, and of course the boats, the three boats. Two of them were intact, one of oak and one of pine, and the third one seems to have been destroyed before being sunk in the bog. Some of these finds also disappeared during the Schleswig War. The pine boat, for example, was unfortunately broken up for firewood by the soldiers. The sacrificed weapons included hundreds of swords, shields, spears, lances, bows and arrows, axes and knives, but also personal effects such as belt buckles, brooches, and ornate clasps. Now, these finds, including the boats, had been, so to speak, symbolically killed. The wooden spears and axe handles, for example, were broken, the arrow shafts splintered, and the arrowheads bent. The very valuable swords were heated and twisted, and the boats were broken up or scuttled with holes hacked in the hull to sink the vessels. Now, this is generally interpreted as a sacred act, an act of gratitude, perhaps, or rendering your enemy useless in the afterlife as well, and also in future battles, perhaps, because you're essentially destroying very good equipment. So, practicality doesn't really have its place here. So, you can think of these bogs as some sort of temples of the Iron Age. The oak boat is the only one remaining, whose planks have been dated by tree rings to 310 320 AD. The oak boat is the second oldest vessel known from Scandinavia and the oldest known clinker built boat in Europe. What does this mean exactly? This was the technology used by Viking ships. Clinker built hulls were made by attaching long wooden planks one to another side by side so that they overlapped along the edges. Every plank was made from a single piece of wood, and they were usually very thin, only about 2 centimeters thick, which is less than 1 inch. Woven woolen cloth and a tarry compound served as gaskets. Furthermore, the slender built ocean going vessel had a true upwardly curved bow connected to the bottom plank. Like the much older yacht spring boat, the oak frames were tied to tenons that had been left standing during hewing. The cleats also served as supports for the thwarts for the rowing berths, and also, very interestingly, the ship has no sails, unlike the ships of the Viking Age, and it was designed solely for oar propulsion, so with the rowers sitting with their backs to the direction of travel. Oarlocks were made of trimmed branches, which were variously decorated and tied to the gunwale. The boat had an original length of about 23 meters and a maximum width of about 3 meters. It was built for 15 pairs of oars, so according to some classifications at least, it can be considered a ship. It probably weighed about 5 tons when equipped for sailing. Interestingly, after the National Museum of Denmark reopened the excavations, a lot of new finds came to light, one being a complete steering oar from one of the Nydam boats. It was also determined that the three boats actually represented three different offerings. The broken up oak boat was the oldest, sacrificed around 200 AD. The pine boat was put in the lake during the early 4th century, and finally the large Nydam warship around 350. New pieces of the pine boat were found, and pine wood itself apparently grew on the island of Gotland of eastern Sweden, and this would suggest that the vanquished army with the pine boat might have come from this mid-Baltic location. Also, oak did not grow in southern Denmark at the time either, and again, the wood must have been of some distant origin. At least 6 other large votive deposits of weapons, equipment, and personal gear dating between 200 and 470 were also discovered. So, on the one hand, we have military equipment found in Denmark belonging to armies and soldiers with their origins in places like southern Norway, western Sweden, the Baltic area, also northern Germany, so quite a diverse bunch. And on the other hand, we have large quantities of Roman military equipment in several weapon offerings, showing that some of the fighting men might have spent time as mercenaries in the Roman army. From the weapons, it is possible to reconstruct the organization of these armies. For example, the swords with metal hilts and the armor seem to have belonged to the upper military hierarchy. Furthermore, the weapons appear to have been mass produced. In the book at Esbjörn, for example, there were around 200 spears and lances, 120 shields, and 60 sets of belt buckles, swords, daggers, so everything. There are also pieces of cavalry equipment, even, and this suggests that the size of these defeated armies would have been quite substantial, at least for the time. The amount of the material and the quality of the craftsmanship in these offerings is also impressive. The Nydam 2 offering, for example, included horse equipment like bronze and silver belt fittings, a mouthpiece of gilded silver with carved decoration, and another mouthpiece with gilded silver with 3 bands of enamel inlay alternating with gilded bands with small stamp decoration, and also a buckle of bronze with silver rivets. So these military men really enjoyed showing off their bling. Now, one question that arises upon looking at all this stuff is, why was this warfare taking place? Although raids and plundering for treasure and slaves and women as well might have played an important part in conflict in Northern Europe, a larger aspect of warfare appears to have been politically and territorially motivated. The size of the armies points to alliances between several chieftains or rulers in the attempt to seize dominion, wealth, and territory. These military activities would be early examples of consolidation of territory and power, marking the growth of political entities across Europe in the Iron Age and more recent periods. And this has also to do with the crisis of the Roman Empire and eventually the downfall of the Western Empire. In fact, the history of the Nydam finds themselves is a story of politics and warfare. Now, when in August 1863 Konrad Engelhardt discovered the oak boat in the Nydam Moor near Sønderborg in Denmark, it was quite a sensation because for the first time it was possible to salvage and also examine a prehistoric ocean-going vessel that had been abandoned in a lake for more than 1500 years. By the turn of the year, Engelhardt had succeeded in salvaging the boat, conserving it, reconstructing it, and presenting it to the Royal Collection of Nordic Antiquities in Flensburg. The idea was to establish a maritime department in the museum, which would include not only the Newton boat, but also the remains of 2 other ships and their accessories. The German-Danish War of 1864 and the resulting removal of the collection from Flensburg dashed these plans, unfortunately, so the Nydam boat ended up in the attic of the building. In 1877, the boat was transferred to Kiel to the Museum of Patriotic Antiquities, but there too the boat was kept in the attic. It had only limited access, a fact that was repeatedly discussed in public. For example, in 1914, the local press reported, "How can anyone believe in the existence of of such an invaluable prehistoric find buried in the floor of an old house?" So then it was moved within the museum building in Kiel to a newly constructed exhibition hall where it could be admired from all sides. In 1941, in a spectacular operation, the boat was transported from Kiel in a box barge through the Kaiser Wilhelm Canal. Now it's just called the Kiel Canal, linking the North Sea and the Baltic Sea, and the River Elbe to the Ziegelsee near Mölln. There it managed to survive the war unscathed, and since 1947, it has been accommodated in a hall in Castle Gottorf in Schleswig. And essentially, it remains a milestone in the technological history of maritime transport, both in Europe and globally. Now, if I sparked off your interest, and I really hope I did, you can continue with the video where I talk about navigation in the Viking Age, and I also have a video about another spectacular pre-Viking find, the Yachtspring boat. Thank you so much for watching, and please to consider supporting this history project by becoming members or patrons. You will get access to extra material, masterclasses, and also ad-free videos on Patreon. Thank you so much. This was Irina, and see you in the next one.